Hello, and Christ is in our midst. Today I'd like to talk about St. Anthony the Great, who is celebrated on January 17th, who's also called the father of monks, and I'll explain what that's about in just a minute. Anthony, and there were others like him, lots of men, some women, who went into the desert in the early years of the church's life, from the 3rd century on, in order to completely, totally dedicate themselves to prayer, to the inner life, to loving God, learning how to love their neighbor, other human beings. And some of them lived totally by themselves, others lived in small groups, some lived in larger communities, but they all had this in common, that they were unmarried and that they were completely dedicated to the love of God and the love of neighbor. And these monks, particularly Anthony the Great, although he was born in Egypt, others were from Palestine and Sinai in the desert in the Middle East. To this day, there are monks and nuns. Nuns is the term for women who serve in this way. There are monks and nuns all over the world, even to this day. There are about 50 monasteries, mostly small, in the United States, for example. And the beginning of this is attributed to St. Anthony. But this week, we also have other saints like Anthony. We have St. Macarius of Egypt on January 19th. We have St. Paul of Thebes, who was this past week on January 15th. And the same day, we have someone known as John the Hut Dweller, also on January 15th. And they all chose this way of life. And in these early years, these desert fathers and mothers, as they were called, because as I said, there were some women. Some of the better known ones were Syncletica and Sarah, Mother Sarah and Mother Syncletica. So these fathers and mothers of the desert were people that others came to look for guidance, for instruction in how to live a Christian spiritual life, how to deal with all the struggles of leading a Christian life. Because when you're trying to do good things, and I'm sure you've experienced this, when you're trying to do good things, sometimes you get the thought that you really don't want to do it, but you do it anyway. Well, that's part of the spiritual struggle. In the spiritual literature, we call it the ascetic struggle. Askesis is a Greek word which means training. Well, this is part of the training of learning how to love God and love fellow human beings. It's not always easy. And so the fathers and mothers of the desert were those that practiced this kind of life, and then others were attracted to it, asked them questions, and then many of them lived around them so they could get instruction all the time. And many of their sayings were later collected. Here's the book, The Sayings of the Desert Fathers. Also includes some of the sayings of the desert mothers, Syncletica and Sarah. So people still today are reading some of the things that these monks and nuns of the desert were teaching, that their own disciples wrote down about how to be a true follower of Jesus and live this life of love of God and love of neighbor. Well, what about St. Anthony? I can't talk about all of these different saints, but St. Anthony, very briefly, he was born in Egypt around the year 251, and he lived to a very ripe old age, 105. And after his parents had died, he was about 18 or 20 years old. He was in church, and he heard the story that you hear in the church this Sunday about Jesus talking to a young man and telling him, if you would be perfect, sell all that you have, give it to the poor, and come and follow me. And Anthony took that absolutely literally. He decided to sell everything he had. He gave all the things to the poor, and then he went off to live in the desert. It's a more complicated story than that, but that was the basic shape of what he did. He heard something in the Gospels, and he did it. And he then lived for many, many years this life of prayer and ascetic struggle, learning more and more about the inner life. And his disciples wrote down some of the things that he said. And I'd like to just read to you 3 of the things that they recorded. Someone asked Abba Anthony, Abba is a word that means father, "What must one do in order to please God?" The old man, that means Anthony, replied, "Pay attention to what I tell you. Whoever you may be, always have God before your eyes. Whatever you do, do it according to the testimony of the Holy Scriptures. In whatever place you live, do not easily leave it. Keep these 3 precepts, and you will be saved." Something else that he said. "Our life and our death is with our neighbor. If we gain our brother, we have gained God. But if we scandalize our brother, we have sinned against Christ." And finally, there are many more, but I'll just read this final one. A hunter in the desert saw Abba Anthony enjoying himself with the brethren, in other words, with the other monks that were around him. And he was shocked. Wanting to show him that it was necessary sometimes to meet the needs of the brethren, the old man said to him, "Put an arrow in your bow and shoot it." So the hunter did so. The old man said, "Shoot another one." And he did so. Then the old man said, "Shoot yet again." And the hunter replied, "If I bend my bow so much, I will break it." Then the old man said to him, "It is the same with the work of God. If we stretch the brethren beyond measure, they will soon break. Sometimes it is necessary to come down to meet their needs." When he heard these words, the hunter was pierced by compunction. In other words, he felt bad, and greatly edified by the old man, he went away. As for the brethren, they went home strengthened. So those are just 3 examples of what Abba Anthony, St. Anthony, learned in the desert about loving God and loving other human beings, especially the people closest around you, and sometimes that you have to be gentle with people and not rough. Other times, some of the sayings of Anthony are very tough, but they were, on the whole, what Anthony was doing was trying to bring people closer to God and not to drive them away. Well, there's much more that could be said about Anthony and the other desert fathers and mothers, and I hope over the course of your life you'll learn a lot more about these great saints who had a lot to show us by their own experience about how to live the Christian life. Christ is in our midst.